What happens when Hollywood royalty meets radio royalty and the gloves come off? What unfolds when a duchess walks into the lion's den expecting royal treatment, but gets the Howard Stern experience instead? You won't believe what went down during last night's explosive episode that had the entire internet buzzing within minutes of airing. Before we dive into this unbelievable story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what happened when Meghan Markle tried to control the narrative on Howard Stern's show. The stage was set for what many expected to be a typical promotional appearance. Meghan Markle, fresh off her latest media venture, had agreed to appear on the Howard Stern show to discuss her upcoming projects and continue her carefully orchestrated media rehabilitation tour. But no one anticipated that Howard wasn't in the mood to play, along with the usual celebrity PR script. From the moment Meghan settled into the guest chair, something felt different. Howard's energy was sharper than usual, his questions more pointed. The atmosphere in Studio 69 crackled with tension that even longtime listeners could feel through their speakers. Robin Quivers, Howard's co-host, picked up on it immediately, her usual warmth replaced by cautious silence. "So, Meghan," Howard began, leaning back in his chair with that familiar predatory smile, "let's talk about authenticity. You've built this whole brand around being authentic, speaking your truth. But I've got to ask you something that's been bothering me." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "When did you decide that authenticity meant rewriting history every time you sit down for an interview?" The question hit like a lightning bolt. Meghan's media-trained smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. But Howard caught it. The audience caught it. Even through the airwaves, you could feel the shift in energy. "I'm not sure what you mean by that, Howard," Meghan replied smoothly, her voice calm and measured. "I've always been consistent in sharing my experiences and my truth." "Your truth," Howard repeated, drawing out each word. "See, that's interesting phrasing. Because truth used to be, just truth. Now everyone's got their own version. It's like ordering at Starbucks. Everyone's got their own special blend." The tension was palpable. Fred Norris, normally quick with sound effects, stayed silent. This wasn't the typical Howard Stern roast. This felt personal, sharp, dangerous. Meghan straightened in her chair, adopting the poised posture familiar to royal watchers. "Howard, I think there's been some misunderstanding about my intentions. I came here today to talk about my new projects and the positive work I'm doing." "Oh, the positive work," Howard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me ask you about that. Does that include throwing your family under the bus every chance you get? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've made a career out of playing the victim while stepping on everyone who helped you get where you are." The studio went silent except for the low hum of equipment. This was not going according to anyone's script. Behind the glass, Meghan's team whispered urgently, debating whether to intervene. "That's not fair, Howard," Meghan said, her voice now edged with frustration. "You don't know what I've been through. You don't know the challenges I've faced or the racism I've experienced." "Racism," Howard repeated flatly. "Right. So let me get this straight. You marry into the most privileged family on the planet, have a fairy tale wedding that cost millions, live in palaces, and your takeaway is that you're a victim of racism? Meanwhile, there are people actually struggling with real racism who don't have the luxury of complaining about it from their Montecito mansion." The gloves were officially off. Meghan's carefully constructed media persona began to crack as her voice rose slightly. "You have no idea what it's like to be constantly scrutinized, to have every move dissected and criticized, to have your children's safety threatened." "Your children's safety threatened?" Howard leaned forward. "By who?" "The paparazzi you call when you want positive coverage? The same media machine you've been feeding for years? Or are we talking about the family members you've been systematically destroying in interviews?" Robin finally spoke up. Howard, maybe we should— No, Robin. Howard cut her off, eyes locked on Meghan. I think our guest wants a real conversation for once. Isn't that right, Meghan? Isn't this what authenticity looks like? Or do you only do authentic when you control the narrative? Meghan's composure cracked further. Her hands, once folded neatly in her lap, now gripped the arms of her chair. You're being incredibly disrespectful, Howard. I came here in good faith to have a conversation, not to be attacked. Attacked? Howard laughed, but there was no humor in it. This isn't an attack. This is what a real interview looks like. When someone isn't spoon-feeding you softball questions. You want to talk about disrespect? Let's talk about how you disrespected an entire institution, an entire family, and an entire country because things didn't go your way. The confrontation was spiraling, and everyone in the studio could feel it. Meghan's team gestured wildly from behind the glass, trying to get her attention, but she was locked in verbal combat with Howard. You don't understand the pressures I was under, Meghan shot back, her voice strained. The isolation, the lack of support, the way I was treated by the institution and the media. I had to protect myself and my family. Protect yourself? Howard's tone rose to match hers. By going on Oprah and torching everyone who helped you? By writing books and doing interviews, painting yourself as the innocent victim while everyone else is the villain? That's not protection. That's character assassination with a PR team. The studio was electric as the two media powerhouses clashed, neither willing to back down, both too proud to retreat. What began as a promotional appearance had become the most explosive confrontation in Howard Stern's show history. Everyone present knew they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years, and this was just the beginning. Howard Stern wasn't finished, and Meghan Markle was about to learn that controlling the narrative wasn't going to be as easy as she thought. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Howard leaned back in his chair. That infamous smirk spread across Howard's face. He'd drawn blood, and everyone in the studio knew it. But instead of backing off, he pressed harder, like a shark sensing weakness in the water. You know what I find fascinating, Meghan? Howard said, his voice deceptively calm, which somehow made it even more menacing. You talk about being isolated and unsupported, but let's talk about what really happened. You had an entire PR machine behind you. Staff, advisors, the best of everything. Yet somehow, everyone around you was the problem. Everyone except you. Meghan's jaw tightened. That's a gross oversimplification of what I went through, Howard. You're reducing complex institutional problems. Complex institutional problems? Howard interrupted, his voice rising. Is that what we're calling it now when you can't get along with your sister-in-law? When you make bridesmaids cry? When staff members quit because they can't work with you? At what point do you look in the mirror and think, maybe I'm the common denominator? The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Robin shifted uneasily in her seat, while Fred sat frozen behind his console. Even for Howard, this was new territory. The complete dismantling of a guest's public persona in real time. That's not what happened, Meghan shot back, her voice trembling with barely controlled anger. Those are tabloid narratives meant to tear me down. I was bullied by the British press from day one, and when I tried to defend myself, I was painted as difficult. Bullied by the British press, Howard repeated with a sharp laugh. You mean the same press that gave you wall-to-wall positive coverage when you started dating Harry? The same press that celebrated your engagement, your wedding, your pregnancy? They only turned on you when you started acting like you were bigger than the institution you married into. You don't know what you're talking about, Meghan snapped, her composure cracking completely. You weren't there. You didn't see how they treated me behind closed doors. The microaggressions, the subtle racism, the way they tried to silence me when I spoke up for what was right. Howard pounced on her words. Microaggressions? Subtle racism? From the family that welcomed you with open arms? The family that spent millions on your wedding? That gave you a global platform bigger than most world leaders? Come on, Meghan. You're sitting here talking about racism while you systematically destroyed the reputation of an elderly woman who dedicated her life to public service. The mention of the Queen hit a nerve deeper than anything he'd said before. Meghan's face flushed with anger, her royal composure gone. "Don't you dare lecture me about the Queen!" she shouted, her voice rising so sharply the engineers scrambled for their volume controls. "You have no idea what that family is like behind closed doors. The silence, the complicity, the way they protect their own while throwing everyone else to the wolves." "Their own?" Howard leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Last I checked, you married into that family. Harry was their own, too, until you convinced him to burn every bridge he had. You turned a war hero, a beloved prince, into your personal attack dog against his own blood. How does it feel knowing you destroyed a man's relationship with his father, his brother, his entire heritage?" The studio crackled with tension as Meghan's mask slipped completely. "Harry made his own choices," she shot back. "I didn't force him to do anything. He saw how I was treated and chose to protect his wife and children. That's what real men do. They protect their families." "Protect?" Howard's voice dripped with disdain. "Is that what you call airing your family's dirty laundry on international TV? Making vague accusations about racism without naming names, then letting the internet destroy innocent people? Releasing private conversations for profit? That's not protection, Meghan. That's revenge." The accusation hit like a blow. Meghan's hands trembled, her cheeks flushed with fury beneath her perfect makeup. Behind the glass, her team was in full panic, motioning for her to end the interview. But she was too far gone to back down. "You think you know everything, don't you?" she said, her voice shaking with rage. "Sitting in your studio, making jokes, pretending to understand what it's like to be a woman of color, navigating an institution built on centuries of exclusion and privilege. You have no idea what I sacrificed, what I gave up, what I endured." Howard rose from his chair, towering over the table. "Endured?" he scoffed. "You endured living in palaces. You endured wearing million-dollar jewelry and designer clothes. You endured having the entire world watch your fairy tale wedding. My heart bleeds for you. Truly." His sarcasm was so thick, it could be cut with a knife. "Howard, maybe we should take a break," Robin said softly. "No breaks," Howard snapped, his eyes locked on Meghan. Our guest wanted authenticity. She wanted a real conversation. Well, here it is. No handlers, no scripted questions, no safe space. Just truth. Meghan stood now, her composure shattered. "You want truth?" she fired back. "Here it is. You're a bully who gets off on tearing people down. You represent everything that's wrong with media today. The cruelty, the lack of empathy, the obsession with destroying people for entertainment. And you," Howard shot back, pointing straight at her, "represent everything that's wrong with modern celebrity culture. The victimhood, the entitlement, the refusal to take responsibility. You burn every bridge and then cry persecution when people won't play along anymore." The confrontation had reached its peak, both of them standing across the table like gladiators in an arena. The studio staff froze, unsure whether to step in or let history unfold. But Meghan wasn't finished. Her eyes blazed as she prepared her final blow. "You want to know the real truth, Howard?" she said, her voice venomous, every trace of royal polish gone. "You're a has-been shock jock who peaked 20 years ago. Now you attack women to stay relevant. You're threatened by strong women who won't bow down to your pathetic attempts at intimidation." The studio went silent. Even Howard looked momentarily stunned by the sheer audacity of her attack. But if Meghan thought she had landed a devastating blow, she had severely underestimated who she was dealing with. Howard's face slowly transformed into something every longtime listener recognized. his most dangerous expression. The calm before the storm. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, measured, and absolutely lethal. "Strong women," Howard said, each word dripping with contempt. "Lady, I've interviewed actual strong women. Oprah built an empire from nothing. Barbara Walters broke barriers when journalism was a boys' club. Hillary Clinton fought her way to the top of American politics. You? You married into royalty and then spent every waking moment complaining about how hard your life was. That's not strength. That's the opposite of strength." Meghan's face went white with rage. "How dare you compare me to other women like we're competing in some misogynistic ranking system? You don't get to define what strength looks like for women, especially women of color who face challenges you could never understand." "Women of color?" Howard's voice rose to match hers. "You want to talk about women of color? Let's talk about the ones who face real discrimination, real poverty, real struggles. While you sit in your mansion complaining about how the royal family didn't appreciate your Hollywood background enough, you've turned your mixed-race heritage into a weapon you pull out whenever someone criticizes your behavior." The accusation was so brutal, so direct, that the entire studio seemed to recoil. Fred actually looked up from his console for the first time during the interview, his eyes wide with shock. Robin's mouth hung open. Even Meghan's handlers had stopped their frantic gesturing and were now frozen in horror. "That is disgusting," Meghan spat, her voice shaking with fury. "You're disgusting. To sit there and minimize the racism I've experienced? To dismiss my struggles because I had privileges? That's exactly the kind of toxic masculinity and white privilege I've been fighting against my entire adult life." "White privilege?" Howard laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "I'm the son of a radio engineer from Queens who worked my way up from nothing. You grew up in Hollywood, went to private schools, had acting coaches, and married a prince. But somehow I'm the privileged one? The delusion is incredible." Meghan was visibly trembling now, her carefully applied makeup beginning to run as her emotional control slipped away. "You don't know anything about my childhood, about what I went through growing up biracial in America, about the struggles I faced trying to make it in Hollywood as a woman of color." "Struggles in Hollywood?" Howard pounced like a predator. "You mean the struggles that led to you landing a starring role on a hit TV show? The struggles that put you on red carpets and in magazines? The struggles that introduced you to the social circles where you met a prince? Because, from where I'm sitting, Hollywood worked out pretty well for you." The confrontation had reached a level of intensity no one in the studio had ever witnessed. Meghan was now openly crying. Not tears of sadness, but of rage. Her whole body shook as she pointed an accusatory finger at Howard. "You are everything that's wrong with this world," she screamed, her voice cracking with emotion. "You sit there in your privileged position, tearing down women, especially women of color, for entertainment. You're a relic from a toxic era that the world is moving beyond. And you," Howard roared back, now fully unleashed, "are everything that's wrong with modern celebrity culture. You take every advantage, use every privilege, exploit every opportunity, and then play the victim when people call you out. You've made victimhood into a brand, and frankly, it's pathetic." The word pathetic was the final straw. Meghan's face twisted with fury as she grabbed her purse and stood so violently her chair nearly toppled over. "I don't have to sit here and listen to this abuse from a washed-up radio host who thinks he's still relevant," she shouted, her voice hoarse from the strain. "You're nothing but a bully with a microphone, and I'm done giving you the attention you so desperately crave." "There it is," Howard called out as she stormed toward the studio door. "The real Meghan Markle. When things don't go your way, when you can't control the narrative, when someone asks you real questions instead of kissing your royal behind, you run away. Just like you ran from your family. Just like you ran from England. Just like you run from every situation where you can't be the victim." Meghan spun around at the door, her face streaked with tears and twisted with fury. "You know what, Howard? History will remember me as someone who stood up for what was right, who fought against racism and inequality, who used my platform to make the world better. You'll be remembered as a sad old man who got his kicks humiliating women on the radio." "History?" Howard laughed one last time. "History will remember you as the woman who married a prince and then spent the rest of her life complaining about it. The woman who had everything handed to her and still wasn't satisfied. The woman who turned being a royal into a professional grievance." With that final exchange, Meghan ripped open the studio door with such force it slammed against the wall. Her team scrambled to follow her as she stormed down the hallway, heels clicking furiously against the floor. The sound of her departure echoed through the studio as the door slowly swung shut behind her. Howard remained standing for a moment, breathing heavily before sinking back into his chair. The studio was utterly silent except for the hum of the equipment and the faint sound of elevator doors closing as Meghan and her team made their escape. Robin was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Well, that was something." Howard wiped sweat from his forehead. "That," he said, "is exactly what happens when someone who's used to controlling every interview, every narrative, every conversation meets someone who doesn't play by their rules." Fred finally found his voice. "I've been working here for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that." Howard nodded, still catching his breath from the intensity of the exchange. "That's what authenticity really looks like, folks. Not the sanitized, focus-grouped version celebrities try to sell you. Real authenticity is messy, it's uncomfortable, and sometimes it reveals things people would rather keep hidden." As the studio slowly returned to normal, staff moving again, equipment being adjusted, everyone present knew they had just witnessed something unprecedented. The most explosive celebrity meltdown in radio history had unfolded in real time, and the aftershocks would ripple across the media landscape for months to come. The interview that began as a simple promotional appearance had become a masterclass in what happens when Hollywood privilege meets New York bluntness, when a carefully constructed public persona collides with unfiltered truth. Howard looked directly into the microphone one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "that was Meghan Markle, showing us exactly who she really is when the cameras are rolling and she can't edit the footage. Sometimes, the most revealing interviews are the ones where the guest exposes more than they ever intended to." And with that, one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history came to a dramatic close, leaving listeners stunned, divided and certain of one thing. They had just heard a moment that would be talked about for years to come.